What is happening, everybody? How are you all doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And today, in no surprise, there are more discussions and rumors and what some people are taking as confirmations about new Nintendo Switch hardware. We also have updates about their forecasted development of Nintendo Switch hardware, upwards of 30 million for the fiscal year. There's a lot of movement. It's very interesting, and so naturally, I want to talk about it. I know that a lot of us are getting really tired of the Nintendo Switch Pro or new Nintendo Switch conversation. Many of us feel like this whole topic is kind of getting beaten into the ground, and I understand. I almost kind of wish that this information didn't come out, but it is also very interesting. The implications every time something like this happens are always huge, and it is fun to talk about, and that's why I have this YouTube channel, is to get these ideas out of my head when they come up. And I think that as we've seen more and more reasons to believe the idea of a Switch Pro in 2021, thanks to the Bloomberg reports and all of that stuff, that when something like this comes out, and today's information is coming from Nikkei, it feels like there really could be something to it. Even though I personally take issue with some of the way that they're actually sharing or stating this information, it's still interesting. There could be something happening, so I want to dive into it. Of course, before we dive too much deeper into this Nintendo Switch hardware topic, I always like to remind you that I am always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I'm hoping to cross 17,000 subscribers before the end of 2021. I upload several videos every single week. I cover mostly Nintendo, I cover a lot of Metroid, I cover all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then hopefully you will consider subscribing to the channel. So like I said, today's report and information comes from Nikkei, and initially this came from a Nikkei article from Japan, where, you know, if you don't speak Japanese or read Japanese, you have no idea what they're saying. Luckily, it's been kind of translated or recontextualized in a Nikkei Asia article that kind of is taking that same information, and we've got it listed out here in English. And the general concept is something that we know is confirmed, and that is, as I said at the beginning here, Nintendo, for the fiscal year that we're currently in, they are now forecasting to manufacture 30 million Nintendo Switch units, again, for this fiscal year, which is a record for the company. I mean, that is an absolutely obscene number of hardware units for any hardware at any period of time in history. I mean, 30 million in 1 year is crazy. And if they actually sell through that, obviously they'd be hitting some just mind-boggling numbers of Switch sales. And there's also a bit of a tidbit in here about potential new Switch hardware being wrapped into this 30 million units, which is a big focus of this conversation, potentially hitting at the Switch Pro that we've been talking about for what feels like 100 years. And so it's all very interesting, and so I want to kind of get into some of what they say here. Nintendo will ramp up output of the Switch to about 30 million units this fiscal year, Nikkei has learned, marking an all-time high for the flagship gaming device in a bid to capitalize on continuing stay-at-home demand. Since debuting worldwide in 2017, the Switch has sold roughly 80 million units as of the end of 2020. Combined with this fiscal year's projected totals, sales of the device would reach 110 million units, eclipsing the numbers attained by the Wii console. Now here is both the most interesting and the most frustrating part to me about this whole article. They say, in addition, Nintendo will release a follow-up Switch model capable of better graphics. This will be the first such offering since the 2019 release of the Nintendo Switch Lite. Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack there between the sales and the new Switch stuff and all of that. I want to touch on the Switch Pro thing. It's like the top of mind thing is this whole new Switch model that they talk about. Because like I said, it is the most interesting and potentially exciting, but it is also kind of frustrating to me. And the reason it's frustrating is when you look at all of the information being shared in this report from Nikkei and then this Nikkei Asia sort of translation or whatever this is here, it's very odd to me the way they just throw this in. This is really the most of what's discussed in that article. I'll have it linked below so you can read the rest of it as far as what's going on with the new Switch hardware. And they literally just casually throw this in as such a factual statement. And there really hasn't been any sort of real confirmation. The Bloomberg reports are very close. And again, I think most of us, not all, but most of us have really kind of bought into this concept of some kind of new Switch model, whatever it is, partly because of those Bloomberg reports. And here they're just like, well, here's this information about the sales, and they're going to be making 30 million units, they're going to be breaking records, 110 million units sold. Oh, and they are making a new Switch. And they just say it. And they don't hint at any other source. I mean, in the article, they reference people close to Nintendo or whatever. But I don't know. And so here's the thing. It's not even that I don't believe it. It's just that as we're sitting here waiting for stuff that we can actually believe in, that feels real and makes sense, or is a confirmation, they just say, oh yeah, duh, didn't you know? They're making a new model. It's gonna happen. And so that aspect of how it's phrased here is a little bit frustrating to me. But if I now put the frustration aside, and if we just start to talk about it like maybe it's a thing that could happen and, you know, further this Switch Pro idea, obviously, it would be cool if we get some kind of new upgraded Switch. Now, we still don't know what this new upgraded Switch could be. There's several different possibilities, and I've discussed it a lot in my videos and live streams and stuff over the past several months. A lot of you guys are really good about understanding and listening and hearing what I'm saying. Some people still seem to get confused on, I think, what the options could be or how I've laid these options out to people. But it's worth noting that this could be anything from the tiniest, most minuscule upgrade that means almost nothing to the end performance of us, the end user, to something so extreme that it could act as if it was almost a next-gen console, even without Nintendo calling it a next-gen console. Because I think that if this Switch Pro, Switch upgrade, new Switch thing, if it is an extreme upgrade that drastically changes the capability of the machine, I don't think Nintendo's going to call it the Switch 2 or the next Switch or whatever. This could be something where Nintendo's plan could be to take the current Switch as it is and give us an upgrade that acts as though it is a next-gen upgrade based on a next-gen jump in power. That to me is the difference that I don't know that everybody has really understood. Granted, I have also been predicting a true next-gen Switch in the next 2 or so years. That is true. But if that were to be proven wrong, and instead they wanted to make the Switch upgrade their next-gen Switch without calling it a next-gen Switch, that becomes interesting. And so there's a spectrum of a Switch Pro that we've all been talking about for the last year or so that this thing could be. It could be as small as the battery upgrade from the red Switch box a year or two ago, where they literally are just like, oh, the screen is slightly better, the battery's a little bit better, and it's no change in price. We're going to slowly remove the current SKUs from all of the stores and replace it with this new SKU, and it's just going to become the default new Switch. It could be that kind of thing. It could be a medium-sized upgrade that's more like a new Nintendo 3DS upgrade, where it makes some slight improvements to some first and third-party games. Maybe we get some better frame rates here and there, but that's all it is. And we get maybe like the 7-inch screen, okay? So maybe we get those things. That's like the medium version, okay? And probably even the most likely if we're being real. The next would be, like I said, almost a more extreme version where maybe this thing becomes as powerful or more powerful than a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X, which would be a massive leap over the capabilities of the current Switch. They wouldn't call it a Switch 2, they would call it New Nintendo Switch or Super Nintendo Switch. And so yes, it feels like the same Switch, but with such a jump in power that it drastically changes how current games look and operate, and adds new titles that can only run on this new version. If we get to a jump that extreme, to me, that becomes a next-gen model of Switch, even if Nintendo doesn't call it next-gen, so they don't have to sell it to the world as next-gen. But let me just rein this back in and say one more time, I don't really expect that either. I think it's the middle-of-the-road version of the Switch upgrade. It's just a small upgrade. You get some better frame rates, and we maybe get this bigger screen, and it's basically a new Nintendo 3DS version of a new Switch. Now, I know there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it's important that we are reminded of the spectrum of what this thing could be if it's even real. And we can't forget, it's still not real. Which brings me back to this article and why I kind of went off on that tangent a little bit about the spectrum and the different models here. And it's the fact that this article, which claims in such a matter-of-fact way that there is a new Switch model being made of this 30 million or whatever, but yet they don't hint in any way, shape, or form what it could be. They do say capable of better graphics, but that's it. And so we continue to wonder, and we continue to question whether or not any of this information about the new Switch in this article is real, or if it's based on anything, or if they're just running with the assumption because they know it gets people interested, and people like myself, hello, actually start talking about it. Now, the new forecast of 30 million Switch units being manufactured and shipped this year in the fiscal year, That's some real information. That's something that we know is happening, and I'm glad that they spend a lot of their time on this article also talking about that and in this update from Nikkei. And as they point out here, if Nintendo hits that 30 million manufacture, and if they also sell through those in this fiscal year, then by the end of this year for the Nintendo Switch, yeah, they're going to have 110 some odd million Switches sold. They will finally surpass the Nintendo Wii as far as the home consoles, and it'll be their most successful selling, highest selling home console they've ever created, which will be a huge feat. It clearly shows faith in the Switch from Nintendo, and it also shows really the strength of the current Switch brand and how well it's selling. And, you know, I'm not the kind of person that banks everything on sales. I don't care if a console or a piece of hardware sells well or doesn't sell well, as far as how I feel about it. For example, I love to death the Nintendo Wii U. I will defend it to the end of my days. The Wii U is a great console, and it's their lowest selling home console. The Nintendo Switch, overall, I think is a good console. I don't think it's great, I don't think it's amazing, but it is very good. It is my favorite on the market, if I'm being honest, but the sales are so very strong. If the Nintendo Switch started to have really bad games and be really boring and uninteresting to me, I'm not going to let the fact that it sells well maybe change my opinion. I would say, oh, the Switch is becoming disappointing to me. I don't care that it's selling well, it's becoming disappointing. But if we step away from that and just look at what the sales mean, it is always interesting and worthwhile to acknowledge when a company in the industry or a company we love, like Nintendo, is doing well. Because when a company does well the way the Switch is doing well, it sets them up for future success. And whatever new crazy ideas, whatever new games or IPs or new hardware, innovative controllers, all these different things we know Nintendo will continue to try over the next 10, 20 years, a lot of it will be built on the success of the Nintendo Switch, which is built on the success of the DS and the Wii before it, and Super Nintendo, NES, and all these different things. And so from that perspective, it's worth noting. I mean, heck, just look at Super Nintendo World. The reason that something like that was even possible is because of the crazy success and money generated from the Nintendo Wii, the DS, the 3DS, the Nintendo Switch, these massive, monumental money makers that Nintendo has been making over the past, 10 to 15, 20 years, not to mention all of their best-selling video games and the fact that most of the best-selling video games on Nintendo hardware are Nintendo's, which means all of the profit are theirs. They're not splitting it with third-party developers and publishers. And so it's that success, that good sales, whether you care about the sales or not, those good sales set a company up for success. And so we've seen Nintendo feel comfortable branching out and working to create this huge theme park that cost who knows how much money, like millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And they were able to do that alongside of still running their video game business. And now I feel like we're maybe sidetracking the conversation. We're going from the sales to the Switch Pro, and we've made it somehow to Super Nintendo World in this video. But all of this is just to say, this is what happens with great success. And so, sure, the amazing sales and the success of the Switch isn't the reason that I enjoy the Switch, but it is worth noting how well they're doing. And when it comes to a Switch Pro upgrade model, or even a next-gen Nintendo Switch, a next-gen console in the next, 1, 2, 3 years, all of that is built on how the Nintendo Switch is doing. Part of the reason it's been easy for me to believe that some kind of next-gen leap for the Switch or for Nintendo is happening in the next 2 to 3 years is because I think Nintendo sees that they want to carry the success of the current Switch into the next model, as opposed to just wait for Nintendo Switch sales to die, for Nintendo's brand and the Switch brand to become uninteresting and try to save it from a dying brand and try to bring it up with the next-gen console. I think they want to ride that into the next machine. I know that a lot of people say, and I understand this, it's not a crazy thought, a lot of folks will come back and defend the idea saying, oh, Nintendo's not going to make a next-gen console until Switch sales die. And I get the thinking, it's not crazy logic, but I just don't believe that. I just feel like that's worse for Nintendo to do. It's better for them to maintain the health of their brand by carrying from one into another. Also, we've got a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X on the market, so I think that Nintendo will be pushed into some kind of next-gen future simply because those consoles are out. Third-party developers are going to be developing for those consoles, and Nintendo wants those games. And so a small upgrade with the Switch Pro won't really do that. Maybe they go with a huge upgrade, which, you know, brings us back to the whole conversation I talked before. And at this point, we just don't know. We have to wait until we have something confirmed. This article claims, oh, it's just happening. We're not going to tell you what it is, but yeah, duh, didn't you know there's a new Switch hardware being made? And so, I don't know. It remains a little bit frustrating to me, and I just want to wait to see if Nintendo finally shows us something here. Are these new 30 million units that they're creating some sort of sign of a new upgraded Switch coming this year? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to tell you one way or another. I'm not going to talk about it like it's fact. I'm not even going to believe this article like it's fact. I've discussed both aspects here. I tend to think something is coming, but we don't know. This article, this stuff from Nikkei doesn't let us know. The only thing we know is happening is 30 million more Switches for this fiscal year, which in and of itself is huge, exciting news. So at the end of the day, these are my thoughts. This is what's going on. This is the report you can read for yourself below and some of my breakdown. Very interesting stuff, even if I get a little bit, you know, upset about the way that they phrased it in this specific article. It is very interesting, and there's a lot of exciting aspects to it, because we all think a new Switch might be coming, and so whatever it turns out to be is just going to be huge. You know, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Whether it's cool or lame, it's going to be fun to talk about it. So this is what I think. What do you guys think about my thoughts? And of course, share your own thoughts and opinions. With that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Overlooked 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.